Welcome to Awesome Movie Year, the podcast where we take a look back at an awesome year for movies, which is every year. I'm Josh Bell, film critic and writer, and I'm joined by my co-host.
Jason Harris, filmmaker, comedian. Uh-oh, Josh. Here it comes. Here it comes, Josh. Uh-oh. If they could see me now, my little dusty prince, chasing around this $1 million chick, I'd hear those real hip cats say, brother, get her. Draped on a bedspread, make 3 kinds of fur. You were supposed to cut me off at any point in time.
Oh, okay. No, you seem like you're having a good time.
If my friends could see me now.
That was not that bad, actually. It's much better than when you randomly scream. So, which has happened.
It's not random. It's inspired by film.
Right. It's still a bit much to begin an episode with. So this was comparatively pleasant. I thought maybe you would rewrite the lyrics to reference our podcast, but I guess that you just don't have that much dedication in you.
No, I did it once, as you remember, and this was
that was great.
All right. Well, hey, maybe down the line I'll rewrite If They Could See Me Now for.
That's okay. I appreciate your
oh my efforts. Oh dear, it's awesome movie year.
There you go. I knew you could do it.
There you
I knew you could do it. Jason's singing skills, as I'm sure we've referenced before your appearance as Officer Krupke in West Side Story. So
what a legend you are, Josh. I played Officer Krupke in high school, and I also played Doc the Shopkeep. So Krupke, is a talk song, and then Doc was like no singing. So that's why I was able to pull that off.
They knew what your strengths were and weren't.
Shout out to Rhonda Carlson, who saw the talent and the lack thereof.
So this isn't West Side Story, though. In our season on the films of 1969, we are here at our audience choice episode, and we offered up 3 big musicals from 1969, which is kind of a transitional period for the genre, as it was for Westerns, as we talked about in a couple episodes. So big Hollywood musicals, though, still a thing. We offered Hello, Dolly, Paint Your Wagon, and the film we are going to talk about, Sweet Charity, from Bob Fosse, which was the winner. Although we didn't get a ton of votes for this one. I guess maybe people less enthused about musicals from 1969 than about some of our other audience choice categories.
We're still going to give it our all. Josh, you said West Side Story. Chita Rivera was the first Anita, and Chita Rivera's in this movie. So.
Yeah, a lot of Broadway people in this film. I think as often happens when a very successful Broadway production is adapted into film, you end up with a mix of performers who had been successful in that stage version, but then you got to bring in at least one big name movie star to sell the movie. And here that is Shirley MacLaine, who plays the title character, Charity Hope Valentine. And she replaces Gwen Verdon, who was the star of the Broadway version, and of course the professional and personal partner of director Bob Fosse, who directed that and choreographed that Broadway version and is the director and choreographer of this film. But John McMartin, Chita Rivera, and Paula Kelly, who all have major roles in this film, were all in the different stage productions. John McMartin in Broadway and Chita Rivera and Paula Kelly in the London production. So lots of talent involved here, and not necessarily just, as I feel like we see more often now, where they're just casting for who is famous and not thinking about who can sing and dance.
Yeah. So we spoke about Gwen Verdon on our All That Jazz episode, and amazing, because she wanted a star in this movie. And, obviously with the studio, we need the big movie star. And she still stayed on and, was an uncredited choreographer, of that dance number that I just referenced, the song and dance for If They Could See Me Now. I watched her do it on Ed Sullivan last night, probably one of her best known numbers on YouTube, not a new Ed Sullivan, Josh. But for her to just stay on and be like, oh, cool, I didn't get the part, but let me give everything I can to this is pretty awesome. I think she's underrated in the, outside of the Broadway community for everything that she offered. You mentioned the musical, nominated for 9 Tonys, winning Best Choreography, which of course, Bob Fosse and Gwen Verdon.
Right. And Gwen Verdon, not known for movie roles or anything like that. So I feel like that's probably one of the reasons, at the time, everyone knew she was the star of this, and people were skeptical about Shirley MacLaine coming in. But of course, now we have the movie as the enduring document of this, and Shirley MacLaine is sort of the definitive Charity. And it's interesting to read reviews at the time, and I think this happened too when we did The Prime of Miss Jean Brodie, where there was a very popular stage production with a star who was so closely associated with that role that the critics are coming into the film comparing it and not necessarily favorably, whereas now we have the film as the enduring version of it, and so we all know the movie actor as the definitive star, and I think that's the case here as well.
I think this is a tougher thing to take on than Miss Jean Brodie, and that's no offense to that film. It's just, one's a straight dramatic role, and there are other people who have inhabited it, but you can just, uh, Maggie Smith, her interpretation, obviously beyond valid, like also amazing, right? But when you hear song and dance in Broadway and you hear the razzle dazzle, you're almost expecting something, and that's tougher to do. But and at first I was a little mixed, like, did she pull it off? But I think Shirley MacLaine pulled it off pretty dang well.
Yeah, I think she's the best thing about this movie. And I didn't watch that Gwen Verdon performance online. And of course, none of us were alive to see her in the actual original stage production. And I'm sure she's great. But I think Shirley MacLaine is fantastic in this film. And to me, watching it, I thought, I can't think of someone else doing this better.
Gwen Verdon.
I mean, maybe so, but it didn't come to mind for me watching this movie now. But at the time, I think maybe the success of that stage version was one reason why this film was not a success, even though, of course, that would be the reason that the film was made in the first place. But maybe people were just not up for seeing a version of this with Shirley MacLaine. It was not a success at the box office. The budget is disputed, apparently, between the studio and Bob Fosse, who this was his first film as a director. Of course, he is a veteran stage director, but this was his first film and had clashes with the studio. So the budget was somewhere between $8 and $20 million, depending on who you ask, which is a big difference. But either way, it grossed only $1.1 million in its initial release. It has an $8 million lifetime gross now, but I assume that's over numerous re-releases, especially as it's become more well-regarded over time. But the initial box office returns were very poor. And it was nominated for 3 Oscars for art direction, costume design, and original or adapted score, which is different from the way that they give out Oscars for scores now. I assume most of the music was repurposed from Broadway. But, those are all kind of more technical awards, and it wasn't the powerhouse at the Oscars that like later Bob Fosse movies were.
Still a fine start for Mr. Fosse that just kind of, he kept elevating and elevating after this, I'd say.
Yeah, I mean, a fine start, I think, in terms of the quality when we watch the movie now, but in terms of success, I mean, it's almost surprising to me that this didn't begin and end his career in film, because it was such a flop. And not only was it a flop, but it was right within his wheelhouse. It wasn't like he stretched and tried to do something very different. I mean, this is a adaptation of a Broadway musical that he himself directed and choreographed on stage, and yet he can't create a success out of it, commercially. We could disagree about whether it's an artistic success, though.
Right. Well, for me, part of the fun was, and I had seen every other Fosse movie except this one. And I think we talked about it in our All That Jazz episode. I don't think there's ever been a better director of musical and dance numbers on screen. And seeing this, like, you can even see, like, even that song that I referenced, there's some really big musical numbers that he stages in some really unique ways, some cool camera work in there. So it was fun for me to see, like, the beginning of that stylization. And obviously we know it kind of levels up on Cabaret and, all that jazz. So I really like that aspect of this film.
Right. And you can tell that he is not just trying to film the stage production, right? He's really reinventing these musical numbers cinematically. They're doing a lot of things camera wise that wouldn't necessarily work if they were just being done on stage. And so he's definitely putting his all into making this something cinematic. And maybe that was for audiences or studio executives at the time a little too much, and they would have preferred a more straightforward one-to-one adaptation of the Broadway version. I don't
I don't know either, Josh. I
Yeah.
don't know either.
So critics then were mixed on this. And again, it's a lot of comparisons to the stage version, like with Miss Jean Brodie. Vincent Canby in the New York Times very unfavorably comparing it to that version. He said, "Sweet Charity, the film adaptation of the Broadway musical, has been so enlarged and so inflated that it has become another Maximal movie, a long, noisy, and finally dim imitation of its source material. In the manner of so many adaptations of hit shows, it recalls the stage production with a certain affection, but without any sense of what made it a hit and potentially valuable movie material. Isolated within Sweet Charity are moments that suggest that Bob Fosse, who directed and choreographed the movie as he did the show, could have made an imaginative musical had he, or the producers, felt less compelled to make a big 70mm production with an established but essentially miscast star." And he spends a lot of time digging at Shirley MacLaine for not being Gwen Verdon.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I could see that, people are kind of expecting a certain thing. And I mean, like, I think Shirley MacLaine's really good, but, like, she's not, sometimes you have that expectation of Broadway and like Ethel Merman and that big larger than life thing, right? And that's not what Shirley MacLaine does for the most part. As for the maximalist issue, it is maximalist, but I don't think that's a bad thing. It's an adaptation of a, larger than life Broadway show.
Right. I mean, I think to the point about Shirley MacLaine, I think it's good that she is not that big Ethel Merman-y kind of thing, because you don't want exactly the performance that you have on stage in a movie. You do that, you end up with the producers, right? Where it feels like the stars are screeching at the audience the entire time because they're playing to the rafters like they would have done on stage. You want a movie performance in a movie. You don't want a Broadway performance in a movie.
I mean, I was actually thinking about the producers too, because that's probably the best Broadway show I've ever seen. And, we covered the original. We love the original, or Dave and I do at least. But the remake is a tough one to get through.
Yeah, it is. I mean, I may not love the original, but that remake is so much worse anyway. And that's a case where it was so closely associated with those stars on Broadway, and they cast those people in the movie just as everyone wanted, and it's terrible.
And you've seen both of those stars in other musical movie adventures to greater success.
Right. And that is interesting too, because of course, in that case, those guys are both veteran movie stars. They know how to give those kind of performances, and they're still just giving those big Broadway performances.
Well,
so I think,
but I was going to just say, like you said, though, right? Like, same director of the Broadway show as the movie. So how much of that is like, hey, just go, gun it at 100 the whole time.
Right. Exactly. And so in that case, here, Fosse is doing the opposite, right? He is also the same director as the Broadway version, but he's really taking care to say, okay, now we're making a movie. How do we make this a movie and not a Broadway show? And I think casting Shirley MacLaine, even if he was pressured to cast her because she's famous, is the right move, because she's giving a movie performance. And as far as that like maximalist idea, I think, like I said, this is a transitional period that the big Hollywood musical is kind of falling out of favor, just like the Hollywood Western is. And so maybe filmmakers are struggling to figure out, how do we approach musicals now in 1969? And you can see Fosse trying to make some of those changes with some of the cinematic stuff that he does, but it still is like a big fancy Hollywood production.
I mean, and in a way, I think it's almost unfair to knock that, because look at the story, right? It's about dance hall girls trying to get a better life, prostitutes, right, who are trying to get into something more stable so they don't have to do this anymore, right? And you have these big sequences where she's at the movie star's apartment, right, or where they're in like this kind of like love cult type church. And, I mean, these are big numbers. You can't play them subtly, because that doesn't really work for what it is.
Right. No, I agree. But I just think that whole idea is something that maybe is being reassessed at this moment. And you see the evolution of the musical in different directions in the years subsequent to this. And it's still something that I think when we make musicals now, there's this tension between the big old fashioned spectacle and something that's more like deconstructive.
Yeah.
So
Well,
that's all.
Dave likes to point out when we do the piecing it together trailer episodes that musicals aren't even advertised as musicals anymore. Like it's a dirty word right now for some reason.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And which is crazy because it's like you're spending all this money to make a musical. If you think it's a bad idea, then just don't. But yeah, I had that recently when I went to the theater and I saw Piece by Piece, which of course is a musical documentary animated thing. And I saw 3 trailers in a row for upcoming musical movies where none of the characters were singing in the trailers. And it's like, what? Anyway, this is a sidetrack thing.
Talk about a transitional period.
It's very
right
strange.
now that we're in.
Who's going to Wicked for not the music, right?
Right. But it's like the studio is afraid of that, or so they just kind of play it in the background as if it's a pop song that they've used to soundtrack the trailer and not something that the characters are going to sing in the movie. But we don't have that problem here. So Penelope Houston in The Spectator was more mixed, less negative, but still not entirely positive. She said, "For once, the choreographer Bob Fosse is also the director. Though in the event, this seems to buoy the film rather less than might have been hoped on the dancing side of things. Capers are cut, the angular chorus strikes its fierce and elongated attitudes. Then, too often for total ease, a self-consciousness about cinema seems suddenly to strike everyone, and there is a camera zoom, an interlude of frozen still pictures, or a fashion photographer's rundown of angles. In any case, the exhilaration of the dancing musical probably begins with a dancer as male lead, and none of Charity's various unlucky attachments is required to be anything but static. While Miss MacLaine herself, though game for anything, is no Ginger Rogers. Bob Fosse, however, gives it all a lacquered Broadway finish, a bit top-heavy in calculated gaudiness, but amiable enough."
Yeah, that I actually think there are some interesting points there, right? Like we often talk about how like the women are there just to like serve the purpose of the men, and this is definitely the reverse of that, right? They're kind of set pieces to advance her story, and that's okay. That's the story. I wonder if the reviews for Fosse, because what I read was like, oh, they, the flop, it depressed him, all this. I wonder if when he, kind of did Cabaret after this, if he was just like, you know what, like I tried to play it a little safe last time. I'm just going to go all in on, being the magnificent Bob Fosse. And that's what we saw from him the rest of his career as a filmmaker.
Yeah, I mean, to me though, this doesn't seem like he's not going all in. I think he really is. But on the other hand, I think some of the points she makes here are valid. I was actually surprised to read that John McMartin, who plays the main love interest Oscar, was from the actual original Broadway production, and he's a major Broadway star, far more than film or TV, and nominated for Tonys and all this stuff because he seemed like such a wet blanket. And the one song that his character sings, Fosse decides to stage in a way so his character isn't singing it on screen. We just hear him on the soundtrack over a series of sort of like montage thing, which Fosse does a lot of that here. And I wondered as I was watching it, like, oh, is this guy not a singer and that they got someone else to sing this or whatever, and that's why we don't see him? And then that's not the case at all. He's a big Broadway star, but he just seemed so like such a nothing compared to Shirley MacLaine. And I don't feel that way about like Ricardo Montalban, who you're right that the characters are meant to serve Charity's story, but he has a great presence in the scenes that he's in.
Josh, how does that song go?
See, I can't even tell you. It's not even a memorable song.
I tried to get him to sing, Dave. So
yeah. I really can't. I really can't. I would have sung a line or two if I could remember it, but I can't.
To your point, that's where the movie slows down, right? Is when this Oscar character comes in, and that's not like out of the ordinary with some musicals, right? A lot of musicals, you get this ravishing razzle dazzle first act, and then things kind of trudge along a little in the second act before we get to the big finale. And I do think we got that in this movie.
Yeah, I just felt like, especially watching it this time, that character was such a drag on the movie and on Charity herself, and that's not necessarily the perspective that we're meant to have. And so that was a bit frustrating.
I mean, maybe it is though, because, she goes after all these other guys who are, kind of bad guys and everything. And maybe she needs this kind of low key, somewhat stable wet noodle guy.
Right. Well, I mean, I think that is what we're meant to think, but I think the wet noodle part of it is not what is not the idea. It's yes, he's stable, he's more dependable or whatever than those bad guys that she's gone after, but it's supposed to be this is someone who really cares about her and really appreciates her, and we want to care too. And I didn't feel that way in the film, so that was frustrating for me this time. But finally, Variety was very positive in their unbylined review. They said, Sweet Charity is, in short, a terrific musical film. Based on the 1966 Legit Tuner, extremely handsome and plush production accomplishes everything it sets out to do. Elements of comedy, drama, pathos, and hope blend superbly with surefire entertainment values, stylishly and maturely planned and executed. MacLaine's unique talents as a comic tragedienne are set off to maximum impact. The film strikes the correct balance between escapist fantasy and hard reality. Fosse's staging of the musical numbers is outstanding. Atop his remembered style is a brilliant, film-oriented appreciation of the emphasis possible only with camera and moviola.
I mean, that's some of the stuff I really liked about it was the way Fosse played with the form, which we know he does in all of his films. But the idea of like, there's like a lot of repetition of even in, if you could see me now, you better believe it, you better believe it. And she's in all these different situations, like is really, utilizing some interesting film and editing techniques and using the space to showcase the emotions.
Yeah, I think, yes, that is true. And as I've been saying, I appreciate that he's making this as a movie and not just as a translated stage production. At times, it did feel a little too much to me. It did feel a bit like I'm making my first movie and let me do everything that I ever thought of I would want to put in a movie, which is a not uncommon thing for first-time directors. And sometimes the stylistic excesses were a little much. And I thought, just show us the people singing and dancing. That's what we want to see. So I'm sympathetic to that. But on the other hand, I'd rather see that than something boring or something that we have now. I mean, to harp again on the producers, where you have the Broadway director, or I see this in the Mamma Mia movies too, where it's like, you don't even know how to like put the camera somewhere so we can see the people singing and dancing, which they're like, which is what we're here for.
Well, and that's why, I mean, I've already said it. I don't think there's ever been a better director of musical numbers on film. And I think, what he takes here and builds out into All That Jazz and Cabaret is like, everything that you're saying, he's like, let me throw everything out there. Maybe that's his style. And that works okay here for you. But in those two movies, I think it even elevates that.
Yeah. I mean, we talked about our All That Jazz episode. And to me, I, have a lot of reservations with that. And I like this more, I think, really. But you are right that he is very good at directing those production numbers. And I think it probably also comes from him being the choreographer, where as a filmmaker, he's like, well, I want to show the choreography. I worked hard on this. It turned out well. Let people see it. And that's important.
On the DVD, there's a kind of making of featurette that I watched, and it was fun because there's like a clip of him like kind of showing a dance move or two. And, watching him and watching Gwen Verdon is really fun to see how they use their bodies, right? It's a totally different skill, and to use your body in that way, emoting through dance. And it was fun to see like masters just kind of showcase that physicality.
So you had not seen this, right, Jason? You'd seen all of Fosse's other films?
Yeah, this was the last Fosse to check off. Now I've seen them all, Josh.
Right. And there aren't, I mean, sadly, maybe we'll talk about again later, he had a very short career as a director, only directed 5 films and died young. So unfortunately, wasn't able to do more in that realm. But all of these films, highly acclaimed. I still haven't seen Star 80, but I've seen all the others. And I'd actually watched this movie fairly recently because I wrote an article about movies based on musicals based on movies. And we should say that before it was a Broadway production, this is based on the Federico Fellini film Nights of Cabiria, which I've also seen, and is darker and bleaker and is explicitly about a woman who is a prostitute, whereas here she's a dance hall girl, which is a euphemism for prostitute, but still, they're kind of softening that a bit. So as we've talked about, including in this season, I'm sort of not crazy about Fellini, but that's probably my favorite film of his that I've seen, and is a well-acted film and worthwhile. I think maybe has been overshadowed in some ways by this musical, but is worth seeing.
I've never seen it, but I do have a question, Josh. In Knights of Cabiria, is the lead character visited by a Vitelloni?
She is actually, because of course the Vitelloni are just like knockaround guys, and that's what it's all about, is her these jabronis who give her a hard time, much like they do in this film with Charity. So yes,
It all works out then.
Yes. Dave, had you seen this one before?
I had not, but I watched this and Liza with a Z to complete the Fosse collection this week. And yeah, I'm glad to get around to it.
Liza with a Z, so good. So good.
It's great.
Yeah.
It's great.
Yeah, so you guys are ahead of me on Fosse, because I haven't seen Star 80, nor have I seen Liza with a Z, which is a concert special featuring Liza Minnelli.
Yeah. I love Star 80. It's so good.
Star 80 is awesome. And, you're talking about style and like, kind of over the top nature. And that really goes for it. It's not a musical, but it's really good. And probably, without a doubt, the best Eric Robert performance on film.
Probably,
I have seen probably dozens of Eric Roberts performances, because he's in like every other movie I review in my ongoing VOD column. But that's, we'll get to Eric Roberts eventually.
He had a moment in the 80s where he was like that, Pulp of Greenwich Village. He was a legit actor at some point.
So. Yeah, and he can be still, like every now and then he pops up in a mainstream movie in a supporting role and reminds you that he's good at what he does when he's not, just able to be on set for 2 hours in front of a green screen for some indie filmmaker who had $3. But that's a separate subject. So, Jason, anything else you want to say about the background of Sweet Charity?
Josh, we keep talking about all that jazz. This is alluded to under a different title in All That Jazz. And the first episode of Fosse Verdon, Joe, is all about how Sweet Charity bombed.
I was going to try to watch at least the first episode, because I guess that's where they really deal with Sweet Charity, and I didn't have time nor to watch Star 80 either. But I would like to watch both of those things, so maybe I will get around to it. But for now, we'll come back and talk more of our general thoughts on Sweet Charity. Welcome back to Awesome Movie Year. In this episode of our season on the films of 1969, we're talking about our audience choice pick, Sweet Charity, the musical from Bob Fosse, which we should say beat out Paint Your Wagon and Hello Dolly were the other choices here that people did not want to hear about.
And Hello Dolly, Barbara Streisand, right?
Yeah, and Walter Matthau.
Yeah.
Which is, I've seen Hello Dolly. I actually got a chance to see it in a theater, and it's fun, but definitely Walter Matthau. We're talking about like casting stars for their star power and not for their ability to sing and dance. And that's definitely an example of that.
And Paint Your Wagon, Lee Marvin and Clint Eastwood.
Yeah. And I was curious, like, I mean, I enjoy this film, as we'll keep saying, but I would have loved to have Paint Your Wagon be the pick, because I've never seen it. And it's such an odd curiosity. And all I remember is a Simpsons gag where I think Lisa convinces Homer to watch it, because it's like, it's a Clint Eastwood Western. And then all of a sudden they're singing and they do some parody of it on The Simpsons. And that's all I know about it.
Yeah. Well, I haven't seen either of those, Josh. So let's focus on Sweet Charity instead.
Let's do that. Yeah. But I figured we should at least mention that and thank everyone for their votes and, the people who wanted those. Maybe we'll get to them someday.
So, Josh, it was interesting because I was confused at the beginning of this, right? Because it's just a still picture of Shirley MacLaine and it says Sweet Charity. And then it says Overture. And it's like a Broadway show where like they're playing you in. So you sit down and you're ready for the show. And it went on for 2 minutes. And I'm like, is something wrong with my DVD? Am I actually going to see a movie here? But, then they get into the movie, but they also have like that intermission section in here. So he is really trying to combine these two forms.
Yeah. Have you not ever seen an old movie with an overture and an intermission? It's not that uncommon, really.
Never mind. It wasn't interesting. I mean, we talked about this with, Gone with the Wind, which in the 30s, I expected that. In 1969, I did not expect that.
Yeah. And that may be true, that it's not as common during that period. And it's certainly something that is taken from Broadway, although it is taken from old movies, although old movies probably took it from Broadway. So yes, that is something that they do. They really do structure this in the same way. as the musical, as the stage version itself. And of course, if you're watching it on DVD, you could fast forward through the overture if you want to.
I might have done that. It's 2.5 hours long. It comes out with a real rocket booster. Like in the beginning, there's so much energy. We see Shirley MacLaine in the streets of New York, and she's getting conned and singing. And then we get almost immediately into Hey Big Spender, which is one of the signature musical numbers of this piece. And Fosse said probably the most difficult one to stage, but also the one that kind of showed him that this can translate into film. And that's a good piece right there. That's a good number.
It is. Yeah, that and as we have already demonstrated, if they could see me now, or if you could see me now, is the two songs, at least for me, that I was very familiar with, like new as big pop culture things, aside from their presence in this musical, that are, have their kind of own lives beyond this production.
Yeah, I thought that. I mean, look, it's funny to think of If My Friends Could See Me Now, because we just saw Lady Gaga sing it in the new Joker movie. I always like to remember Dave Letterman just screaming it out for no reason. He would just go, "If my friends could see me now," and then just stop. It was funny. But in the second act, you have that one big musical number, the brass band, which is, I read, one of the longest musical numbers in the history of film. And that's really the most memorable one, maybe the closing song. Well, Sammy Davis Jr., that's a big thing, The Rhythm of Life. And, it's fun to watch him. But I think the first act really just kind of hums and moves. And then we really kind of get stuck in the mud for a little in the second act before it kind of crescendos.
Yeah, I mean, I felt like once Oscar showed up, I was pretty disappointed, and I like it still. I mean, I think all the musical numbers are really good. Even that Sammy Davis Jr. number, where watching the movie, I thought, there's no reason for this to be in this movie. Absolutely not. You could easily have cut this, and this character, at least if you have other musical numbers like Big Spender, for example, where it's Charity's coworkers who are singing. I mean, she's there, but she's not really the main singer of it. But they're characters. It's the environment that Charity's in. But Sammy Davis Jr., that character is not even really a character. They go to this weird church for no reason. They kind of explain it away with one line that makes no sense. And he sings this big song, and it's got this kind of whole hippie aesthetic to it. And then he runs away with his followers and is never seen again and has no bearing on the plot whatsoever. And that's fine, right? Musicals are full of musical numbers that have no bearing on the plot. But it is, as you said, 2.5 hours. It's not a Broadway show. It's a movie. And I think this happens a lot with Broadway adaptations, where it's like, these are too damn long and you need to cut more. And I honestly, I could have done without Sammy Davis Jr. number.
On the flip side of it, right, we're casting Shirley MacLaine. We got some star power here. Sammy Davis, give him a big number in the second act and, let him go. I can understand that. And I know what you're saying. Like, you could cut the whole thing. But on the flip side, it's really fun to watch Sammy Davis Jr. do his thing, right?
Sure. Yeah, it is. And he's clearly having a good time playing this like hippie cult leader or whatever. And it's not a bad song. It's not a poorly staged performance. It just, I think by that point in the movie, I was like, do I really need this detour here for, 8 minutes or whatever it is? And I didn't.
That's a fair point, because there's that other number in the second act where what would you call him? I guess he's the manager of the dance hall, Herman Stubby K, who, was in the original cast of Guys and Dolls. He sings like I Always Cry at Weddings. And it's like that's a real, fun Broadway musical number that he nails. And it's like, are we just tired at that point though?
Yeah, I guess. But again, I feel like at least that's like, we know who this guy is, and it's part of the arc, right? He's been kind of mean to Charity, right? He seems like he's not sympathetic to the dancers' complaints or whatever. And here we get this moment where we're seeing his sentimental side and everyone's sentimental side. And the point of that scene is, hey, these people really care about Charity, and they're all really happy for her that she's found love and she's going to get married and she's going to go on to this great new life. And so even though Sammy Davis Jr. is more of a big presence, right, than Stubby K is, I like that number more because it felt like, okay, I care about what's going on here. And it's, of course, another well-staged musical number Although it also features one of those cinematic moments where Fosse is just kind of showing off for no reason with the freeze frames that like interrupt the song. And that was a bit weird.
I think so. I mean, like you said, it's his first film. He was experimenting. Maybe he didn't perfect everything. Stubby K, I think, started in a vaudeville, and what a great vaudeville name, Stubby K. You know?
Yes. Certainly his real name, I'm sure.
But I mean, we seem to be in agreement that this Oscar character is just kind of where it all slows down. And the thing I wonder is, you know, we know there have been revivals of this show. I actually listened to Christina Applegate sing If My Friends Could See Me Now last night because she was in one of the revivals. And it was great. I didn't know she could sing like that. It was really cool. But I think you would have to rewrite the Charity character, at least towards the end, right? Where it's, you know, Oscar's like, oh, I saw your picture and then I saw you with the girls and I can't get it out of my head. And now I can't marry you. And then in the movie, Shirley MacLaine's like, well, let's just do this. Let's do that. We could just hang out. You know, we'll get married. We could figure this all out. But I think now you would want a more kind of, kind of independent, kind of forward thinking person like, hey, if you can't accept my past, then you're just not right for me at this point.
Right. I mean, and I don't think this is necessarily a problem of adaptation or a problem of the movie itself. Obviously, the character as it exists and the arc of the character related to Charity is from the show, and I assume is intact in later productions of the show. So, I mean, that to me is an issue. It's not just the performance, although, like I said, I did feel like that performance was pretty weak, but it's not just that. It's the entire conception of that character and the way he relates to Charity. And you're right. I mean, I think it's tough to root for them, to root for her to find love with this guy who's such a scold and so judgmental. And even though he frames it as like, look, I just can't get past this and it's my problem, like it's still a judgment on her. And it compounded my sort of disinterest in him. And so the ending of the movie, which is meant to be, I guess, kind of bittersweet, I don't know, it didn't quite land as well for me because I wasn't like wistful about like, oh, it's too bad she's not with this guy.
Well, that's interesting because did you watch the alternate ending?
I did. And that's worse. I mean, Definitely worse.
So the ending that we see in the movie that Fosse wanted was, she kind of spends the night in the park and, just has to kind of regroup. And the next morning she's got like this hope of, again, like it's New York and I'll make it and I'll just keep going and I'll find my way. Right. And that's the ending that's in the movie. And it is that kind of like, hey, dust yourself off, get up. It's another day. Right.
Right. And that's the ending from the Broadway show as well, intact in the movie.
So Fosse shot this alternate ending, which he did because he thought the studios would want a happy ending. Right. And Oscar's left Charity. Charity's on this bridge in Central Park that we've seen her on earlier in the movie and seen her with Oscar. And in the first act, she falls into the water. We know she can't swim. So in this one, Oscar and Charity, they're both in that same area. Oscar falls into the water and Charity, even though she can't swim, jumps into the water to try to save him. And he says, oh, now I see you're like, you would do anything for me. We have to be together. Let's get married. And that's the end of it.
Right. And that's, again, a worse ending, less believable. And it's good that they didn't use it. Although it was interesting to me reading the Variety review. And in their review, they say, Pick was made available with both sad and happy endings. And as far as I'm aware, that happy ending was never released in theaters. So I don't know if Broadway or if Variety at some early screening was able to see both endings. For some reason, they would have wanted to show that to the press. Very strange. And I didn't see references to that anywhere else. But I do think that the way it ends is the right way for what this is. I think it's not about that. It's just about the entire arc of the character. And I don't know what I would have wanted for the ending. Knights of Cabiria has a much bleaker ending, but the ending of Knights of Cabiria is so bleak that I remember watching that and thinking, oh my God, are you really doing this to your main character? Like, what is wrong with you, Federico Fellini? So I don't know what I wanted out of it, but it just was frustrating.
You mentioned Ricardo Montalban. He gives a real movie star performance here, I think.
Yeah, and he's great. And I think that's part of it, is that he's so good. He's so charismatic. And even though that character is not necessarily the greatest guy either, I think there's more magnetism to him. And we could see how Charity or anyone would be drawn to that guy, despite his flaws, versus Oscar, who, as you say, Jason, is just a wet noodle.
Right. I mean, to me, the whole Oscar thing, and, we see these kind of montages of them going on dates, and she's gonna, in her mind, she's saying stuff like, oh, here's the part where he tells me he forgot his wallet at home and I have to pay for lunch. But we see all these things not happening where he does pay for her and he takes her to these places. And so I think the whole point of him is that he's supposed to be stable, but he's got so many of his own issues, right? That there's kind of a manicness to him. But I don't know. I think the musical stuff is the stuff that I really lean into here, as opposed to the non-musical aspects of this film.
Right, and that stuff is really good. And I think Shirley MacLaine's performance is really good, not only in the musical aspects, but in the dramatic aspects too. And that, as we're talking about earlier, like she can do that nuance, the not stage version of this, right? The cinematic version where the camera is close to her and we're feeling those emotions, because she's really good at all of that stuff. And I think she's fantastic overall. But yeah, maybe the big fancy musical numbers and the cinematic techniques, the visual style is more appealing than the way that the story plays out. But I did enjoy Ricardo Montalban in that whole sequence. And I feel like that's a good way of showing, like, this guy, obviously, right, he has flaws. He ultimately makes Charity like hide in a closet while he has sex with his girlfriend that he's reunited with. That's not great, but he does it with such generosity and sweetness that we kind of like him anyway. And Charity too, he's apologizing to her and she's like, oh, no, I had a great time. It was all wonderful. I'm so happy. So I feel like that was a great balance, and due in part to his performance that we don't get with Oscar. So, But all credit to Ricardo Montalban, who's very good in this.
Okay, good enough. We'll take it.
So, okay, Jason's ready to move on to
Dave.
This.
What about you? Any standouts here? What do you think?
Well, I mean, first of all, I think I like this a lot more than either of you. I thought that, first of all, the musical performances. I mean, there's just not better ones anywhere, pretty much. I mean, they're just so in all of his movies, really. But I loved everything with the Oscar character because he's a wet noodle. Like, I think that was kind of the point, is that all these guys kind of suck. And that was, I thought her whole journey was to just kind of make it through these wrong choices. And then by that ending, that, maybe there'll be something better, on the horizon. I laughed really hard when that church that he finds, he found it in a Religion of the Month mailing list. I mean, that alone is just like, what kind of loser is this guy? I just thought this movie was just so much fun from beginning to end. And by the way, that Sammy Davis Jr. sequence, do not cut it. It's so good.
Yeah, I mean, to me, that line you thought was funny, but I was like, oh, this is just somewhere along the line was like, we got to find a reason why the characters are here, why we had this happen. And so they just throw that in there that makes no sense. And I don't know, I could have even just been like, don't even bother with that. Like, just have this happen without the characters in it at all.
Maybe it's a little on the slapstick side of things or something. Like, it's just a very stupid reason for him to have found that. But I just think that kind of goes towards his character just being this total kind of doofus. He's useless.
I keep thinking of that number, and I think of the King George stuff in Hamilton, right? The Jonathan Groff performance, which is great. You could cut that whole thing and the story would still hold together, but it's one of those performances that's super memorable. So I would leave it in too, Josh.
Yeah, I mean, again, I know that musicals are full of performances and song and dance numbers that are not relevant to the plot. And that is, of course, fine. I guess I just didn't like it enough. It was fine. Sammy Davis Jr. is very talented, but I wasn't into it enough to think, oh, this is essential to keep, even though it's not essential to the story or the character development. So
what about the Rich Man's Frog? I don't think you guys talked about that.
And I would have done it. I would have done without that too. The long,
that's so iconic, that whole
I guess. Yeah, I don't know. I was like, again, this time, like the first time I saw this movie, I think I liked it a bit more, and it was less than a year ago. So I don't know what changed. But watching that this time, I was like, man, this just goes on and on, doesn't it? And sure, the dancing is cool. There's not even any singing in that sequence in the nightclub where she goes with Ricardo Montalban. But I could have done without that too.
No, yeah. I disagree. I love that sequence. And you really see the bodies, kind of the movement of the bodies. And I really like that sequence.
Yeah, it's again like the dancing is very good and it's creatively staged, but I just was sort of less invested at that moment. So, but I do want to say, Dave, going back to your point about the idea that she's meant to just kind of like these guys all are not right for her and she's meant to just kind of get past them. I don't feel that way, but I did see that at least in one revival stage production of this, they cast the same actor as all of these three male love interests, the guy at the beginning who
That's
never has a line, and then as the movie star and as Oscar. And I think doing that really goes to your point, Dave. That's a way to really emphasize that idea that these guys are all kind of wrong for her.
If it was me, I would cast one of those love interests as a woman.
Yeah, well, now that might be something that would happen. You could see the movie star, the glamorous movie star, right, being a female character rather than or even Oscar, maybe, right? She's decided, hey, look, these guys didn't work out for me. I'm going to get with a nice, stable woman instead.
I mean, she could just be a bisexual who
could,
you know. So
right.
Let's get Kristen Stewart in there. She'd be good.
Why not? So yeah, I don't know. I mean, I'm being critical, but I did enjoy this. I mean, I think I enjoyed it more the first time, but overall, I did enjoy it. It's the songs are so good. Shirley MacLaine is so good, and all the visual creativity, even if it's sometimes excessive. Like there's always something new to look at in this movie. So overall, I'm positive on it. I just felt a bit more frustrated with it this time.
Well, then should we rate it, Josh, out of 5 big spenders?
All right. I'm going to give it 3.5 big spenders. I was kind of on the fence, but it is good. So I'm going to go with 3.5. Jason, how about you?
3.5 big spenders for me too. I liked it. Not my favorite Fosse movie, but that is less about this movie and more about how great his other movies are. Good movie.
Dave?
Watch it.
Yeah, I know. I agree. Dave, how would you rate it?
I'm going 4.5, and I don't have any of his movies below 4 at this point. So
yeah. He's a monster, bro.
So good.
We've gotten so many high ratings from you this season, Dave. You
it's
really
crazy.
Love the films of 1969. So
Dave
that's wonderful.
It's a pretty good movie year.
Dave is a bridge to New Hollywood for us, Josh.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's wonderful. So we'll come back and talk about the legacy of Sweet Charity. Welcome back to Awesome Movie Year. In this episode of our season on the films of 1969, we're talking about our Audience Choice Poll winner, Sweet Charity. And Jason, as you said, it was mentioned in a different way in All That Jazz, which of course is Fosse's autobiographical film and depicted in the first episode of Fosse Verdon. So, I mean, it's the production of this movie, and especially the failure of this movie, is a big notable moment in Fosse's kind of development as an artist.
To me, when I watch Bob Fosse, what I think is any generation you put this guy in, he would have succeeded at the highest level, right? If he was in the golden age of Hollywood doing big Busby Berkeley style musicals, he would have killed it. If he was out today, he would probably be working on like limited series somewhere. But like the thing is, like, he has so much equity because he was already like, no matter what happened with his film career, he was going to be like the leading kind of a figure on Broadway from behind the scenes, or one of them, right? So I think he did take a lot of chances as a filmmaker. And I just think like this amount of talent and creativity would have worked whenever any type of entertainment, any form, any era. Like, I just think he's like, he doesn't miss to me.
Yeah. And as we said, he had a limited career as a filmmaker. I mean, he did go on, despite the failure of this film, to big success with Cabaret, All That Jazz, Star 80, and Lenny. And we did, of course, our episode on All That Jazz. He won the Oscar for Best Director for Cabaret. And he wasn't one of these people who started making movies and then made that his focus and stopped working on Broadway. He was still working extensively and even more so as a choreographer and director on stage. He also worked in TV. Of course, we mentioned Liza with a Z, the TV special for Liza Minnelli, which he won an Emmy for, and, died young at age 60 while he was in the process of trying to put together another movie. So who knows what he could have done had he lived longer.
I know. I wish we would have seen it. I think we talked about he and De Niro were working on like a Walter Winchell idea at some point in time, which would have been cool to see. Dave, you've seen all the movies. This is how I would rate them. Cabaret is number 1. Lenny is number 2. All That Jazz is number 3, but those two are like right next to each other. Star 80 is number 4, and that's like an amazing movie anyway. And then I put this at 5th, and Eliza with the Z is probably ahead of this, but I'm not counting that because it's a different thing. So that's my Fosse rating system, Josh.
Nice. I like it.
Yeah, I haven't seen Cabaret in a long time, but I remember really, really liking it. So I feel like I'd probably put that at number 1, and maybe then Lenny, and then this, and then All That Jazz, which, as we talked about, I had a lot of reservations about, and I still haven't seen Star 80. So, but I mean, for someone who made only 5 movies, that's a really impressive track record either way.
I think if you're like a filmmaker who gets, who has a bomb or bad reviews, like you should look at him and be like, his first movie tanked, it got crushed. And then his next movie, he won every Oscar available, right?
Right.
Sure. So. Yeah. I would put All That Jazz at number 1, by the way. Cabaret number 2. It's fantastic. And then, I don't know, I really got to think about the other 3. They're all probably tied for 3rd place for me. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, fantastic stuff. So unlike some stage version, I feel like when the Prime of Miss Jean Brodie, which was so tied to that stage production, but then it hasn't really been performed much since then, Sweet Charity is revived over and over and over again. It actually won the Tony for Best Revival in 1986, was revived again on Broadway in 2005, on the West End in 1998 and 2009, and just had another major revival in 2019. Other major stars who have played Charity include, as you said, Jason, Christina Applegate, as well as Molly Ringwald and Sutton Foster. And I'm sure this will have another stage revival fairly soon.
I think the 86 revival, Josh, is the cast that I honed it on. It's Debbie Allen and BB Newirth. How could that be bad?
Right. Yeah. That sounds fantastic. So, and I like I said, I thought that idea of casting the same actor as the love interests was an interesting strategy. I don't know if any other productions would be doing that.
I think you should cast everyone as the same actor, a one-man Sweet Charity.
One person Sweet Charity.
One woman Sweet Charity. That's right.
I feel like you could pull that off, Jason. I want to see you do it.
Yeah, now that you heard my singing at the beginning, how could you knock that? Josh, I want to get into the music, but I think one thing we got to talk about, I don't think we've ever talked about Edith Head on this show, who did the costumes, is the most legendary costume designer in the history of costume design, right? Like not just on screen, but also on stage. She has 8 Academy Awards for Best Costume Design. I was trying to count her number of Academy Award nominations. She has so many, I lost count and just stopped. So, but Edith Head, right? The first thing that I read was, the thing that broke her was the Dorothy Lamour's sarong in The Jungle Princess. But look at the actors she worked for or costume design for. Ingrid Bergman in Notorious, Gloria Swanson, Sunset Boulevard, Audrey Hepburn, Roman Holiday, Sabrina, Funny Face, Breakfast at Tiffany's. This is just a few, right? Grace Kelly, Rear Window, To Catch a Thief, Tippi Hedren, The Birds, and Marnie. And then on the male side, Cary Grant in To Catch a Thief, Elvis in Blue Hawaii, John Wayne in The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance. It's just like a who's who, like she's the go-to.
Yeah, I mean, there's no other costume designer. I don't know if there's any other costume designer who has like a famous name. I mean, I'm sure there's others who have lots and lots of Oscar nominations and long careers, but
Mary Zophres would be the closest I would think, right?
But even that, like Edith Head, I feel like anyone who knows about film, that name. That's a celebrity costume designer, and that's not something that really exists in other ways.
Yes, and it was nonstop from the 30s till she retired, right? Or what, died, so she was just working constantly in every field and killing it every single time.
Yeah. So Shirley MacLaine, also obviously a major legend and still working. She's 90 years old and was, relatively recently a major guest star on Only Murders in the Building. She's been nominated for 6 Oscars. She won an Oscar for Terms of Endearment. So many iconic roles. Although I was looking through it, a lot of big Shirley MacLaine roles like Steel Magnolias and Postcards from the Edge and Terms of Endearment I've never seen. But I do love her in Billy Wilder's The Apartment, which is previous to this, and she's playing a character who has some similarities to Charity. And of course, Richard Linklater's Bernie. She's fantastic in that. Yeah. That's a favorite of mine. So I don't know what she's got in the works now, but as far as I'm aware, she is still very much active as an actor.
I know what she has in the works now, Josh. Right. I wrote it down, but I agree with you, Bernie. I think We Grew Up Guarding Tess was a big thing in the 90s, or a thing in the 90s. And then the other one that I wanted to mention, I did like her in, like you said, she was in Only Murders. But what was Being There. She's great in Being There. That's the other one for me. So the two movies that she's got coming up, Men of Granite, a group of poor immigrant high school boys in Granite City, Illinois, defy all odds and go on to win the 1940 state championship in basketball. And then People Not Places, a sprightly woman in her twilight years strikes up an unlikely friendship with a local homeless man while struggling to mend a troubled relationship with her son.
Oh, those sound terrible, but good for her for still working.
I'm just telling you what they are.
Maybe she'll salvage those, but those sound like awful movies.
Especially People Not Places.
Yeah. Well, I mean, even when you saw Only Murders, right? She's 90. She's probably not that ambulatory now. So, that type of movie, there's probably a lot of sitting. You know what I mean?
Yeah, but that's okay. I mean, she still brought it. I feel like I compare her to like Carol Burnett, who's still working at that age and was just on Palm Royale on Apple TV and really going for it on that show, like giving this very big comedic performance. So good for them for, still being out there.
Yeah, I agree with you on that, Josh. John McMartin, who you spent this whole episode trashing.
He's not good in this movie. He's not good.
Nominated for a Tony for this role in 1966. His film work includes All the President's Men, Brubaker, and Blowout. And Josh, like you said, a major Broadway actor, Follies, Into the Woods, and the one I marked down, Grey Gardens, the musical.
Yeah, exactly. I think he was nominated for a Tony for that one as well. He's been nominated 5 times for Tonys. And yeah, I mean, his movie career is very limited. And he did a lot of TV guest starring roles. He was on Law and Order a bunch of times and things like that, but mainly known for being on stage. And I'm sure he's good. It's just this movie, this character, this performance, maybe he does a better version of it on stage that he was nominated for a Tony for. I don't know. But I was struck by how little I appreciated his work in this film.
Well, I hope you appreciated the dancing of Chita Rivera, Josh. She's got 2 Tony Awards, 2 Drama Desk Awards, a Drama League Award, and she's the first Latina to receive a Kennedy Center honor and a Presidential Medal of Freedom. Like I said, we know her obviously as Anita, but she also, in West Side Story, she also originated the role of Velma Kelly in Chicago and the title role of Kiss of the Spider Woman. Absolute legend.
Yeah, I mean, so many of these people here are stage legends. I mean, have been on screen a lot, but known for that more. Paula Kelly, who plays the other main like co-worker, dancer, friend of Charity's, is another prolific actor on stage, and she's also a choreographer and, has been on TV, including on the first season of Night Court and on Women of Brewster Place, which is kind of a landmark TV miniseries. But these are Broadway people, and to a large degree, aside from Shirley MacLaine, Bob Fosse really brought over all of these stage veterans to appear in this film.
Right. I mean, you look at Stubby K. He originated the role of Nicely Johnson in Guys and Dolls, and Marion Sam and Lil Abner, Josh. Lil Abner.
All right.
But
I do want to give credit. Ricardo Montalban was not a big stage guy, but is fantastic and so prolific. I feel like people mainly know him from like the later Planet of the Apes movies and Star Trek and Fantasy Island, a lot of genre stuff, but he did basically every type of movie, every type of TV show. And of course, people still remember him advertising Chrysler cars and their rich Corinthian leather, which is a not real thing that was made up for commercials, which is always amusing.
I'm glad you did that, though. He has an Emmy for How the West Was Won. And of course, Josh, he appeared in Spy Kids.
That is important. So I did want to mention, you referenced the performance of If My Friends Could See Me Now by Lady Gaga recently in the new Joker sequel. I always remember the Carnival Cruise commercials starring Kathy Lee Gifford, where they did rewrite the lyrics to this song to sing about Carnival Cruises. And I must have seen those dozens of times when I was a kid, to the point where I had no idea that this was a song from a stage musical. And when I watched this movie for the first time, all I could think was, holy shit, it's the Carnival Cruise song. And I still can't ever think of it other than that.
Well, I think that's when I was talking about Letterman. He was making fun of Kathy Lee Gifford. So that's what that was all about. There's also, have you ever heard the disco version of that song by Linda Clifford?
No, but I guess that was a big hit as well. So that's maybe for that Kathy Lee Gifford version just hit me at the right time when I was watching constant TV when I was a kid and just saw that commercial over and over and over again.
Yeah, another legend. She should play Charity.
She probably could have at one time, but I mean, she gives it her all in those commercials and she sings it very well. Big Spender, also another one that's recorded many times by various people. Shirley Bassey had the biggest hit with it, but it was recorded by a bunch of other performers as well. And I think, again, you go into this and if you're not familiar with it, you will know those two songs from other things.
Right. But we should mention Rich Man's Frugluch. Dave said, because, if you've seen the Single Ladies video or Jenna Ortega's dance in Wednesday, like these are all alluding back to that number and everything.
Yeah, those dance moves, I think, are iconic, even though maybe I was a little bored with that sequence.
Josh, you didn't mention Sammy Davis Jr., Mr. Show Business. Do you like him better in Ocean's 11 or the Cannonball Run?
I haven't seen the Cannonball Run, but honestly, the original Ocean's 11 is not very good. The Soderbergh version is so much better.
The Cannonball Run's all right. It's like, it's kind of, if you're in that mood for like the Burt Reynolds, like Southern Fried car chase movies, like I often am, that you can watch it and enjoy it. Did you know The Candyman reached number 1 in June 1972? That's pretty cool. This guy did it all.
Yeah, I mean, he was amazing. And he's not a huge element of this film, right? He comes in, he does that one thing and he leaves and you never see him again. He doesn't really have much in the way of spoken lines. He just does this musical performance and he's good, but he's not, I wonder how that's done on stage, because it's like not an integral character. And do they just get an actor who comes in and belts out one song on stage each night? I don't know.
Well, that's what I'm saying with like the King George part, who's just like there a little bit and, comes back. But Josh, imagine the year he could have had here if he did this and he was cast in Midnight Cowboy, another movie about working people right there.
Right. There are similarities. You could feel like Joe Buck and Charity Hope Valentine might very well cross paths.
They would be the couple that should end up together.
Right. Yeah.
I feel like Joe Buck probably doesn't swing that way. It would not turn out well for them in the bedroom, I don't think.
All right. Well, if she challenged him and said, like, why can't you perform your duties, then he would get it going.
Yeah, but you don't want to do that every time. I feel like that gets old. So anything else you want to say about the legacy of this film, Jason?
If my friends could see me now.
What a finale. That
Nice.
is sweet
That was
Charity. And that is this episode of Awesome Movie Year. You can see us now online and on social media.
That's right. We are at awesomemovieyear.com, Awesome Movie Year on Facebook and Instagram, Awesome Movie Pod on the platform that should be thrown into the river below Central Park. I'm Jason Harris Comedy, or Jay Harris Comedy, on all the things. You can find me at Eat This Comedy doing a lot of shows. And we got a lot of trivia nights around town now, Josh. So hit me up and let's get going. Go for Jason on Letterboxd.
You can find some old stuff from me at joshbellhateseverything.com. I am at Josh Bell Hates Everything on Facebook, at Signal Bleed on that unfortunate ex-Twitter platform, as well as on Blue Sky, which is really, thanks to the terribleness of Twitter, picking up. So check me out at Signal Bleed on Blue Sky, as well as on Letterboxd. And if you're on Letterboxd and you watch this movie or any of the movies we talk about on the show, tag your review Awesome Movie Year. We would love to know what you think about the movies we talk about. And you can listen to our producer, David Rosen's awesome podcast, Piecing It Together.
Check out Piecing It Together wherever you listen to podcasts. Follow us on social media at Piecing Pod, and join our Facebook group, Popcorn and Puzzle Pieces, where we continue the conversation about all the movies we talk about on the show. And we got a whole bunch of votes for this episode.
Yeah, thanks to everyone in that group. We always get good response to our polls there. Generally better response than we get on the old Twitter. Maybe they'll add polls to Blue Sky eventually, and we can put them there, or Letterboxd even. So, Jason, what's in our next episode?
Josh, an epilogue.
Yes, as always, we're going to look back at the season, at the year, and talk about what we did and didn't cover from 1969. So tune in next time for that. And thanks for listening to Awesome Movie Year.
Thank you for listening to Awesome Movie Year. Make sure to follow Awesome Movie Year on Facebook, at Awesome Movie Pod on Twitter, and at Awesome Movie Year on Instagram. And if you like the show, review us and rate us with 5 stars on Apple Podcasts.
All Points West production, produced by David Rosen in Las Vegas.
And the first episode of Fosse Verdon, the Ryan Murphy show, is all about how Sweet Charity bombed.
Is that a Ryan Murphy show?
Isn't it? It's like Feud, right? Feud, Fosse Verdon. Isn't that Ryan Murphy?
No. I don't think. I mean, it's an FX show, but I don't think Ryan Murphy was involved in it.
I think he is.
I'm going to check that right
Let's
now.
fight.
You're getting fact checked.
We don't need to fight. We can just, look it up. So no Ryan Murphy involvement in that.
Okay. I was wrong, everybody. Josh is right. Everybody, Josh is the best. I'm the worst. Let's move on.
I'm just trying to get our facts right. We can edit this out.
I was going to back you up, Jason. I thought he did too. So that's so weird that we both thought that. But yeah.
Did you watch that episode, Jason, the Fosse Verdon, or any of that?
No, because I don't need to watch any more Ryan Murphy shows.
No, not Ryan Murphy.